Welcome to the debate unit. In this video, we're going to be learning about the differences between debates, fights, and arguments. You will be learning how to describe different characteristics of debates and a lot of different vocabulary related to debating, such as counterarguments, rebuttals, claims, opening and closing statements, etc. So let's get started. Why are we even bothering to learn about debate, you may ask? We're going to focus on three major reasons. The first being that it's a definite life skill to be able to persuade others to get what you want. You are probably pretty good at this already, especially if you've ever had to convince your parents to let you do something or talk your friends into doing something that you want. But eventually you're also going to have to write college admissions essays proving why you are amazing and worth admitting or investing in with scholarships. And you're eventually going to have to argue for something you want in your job, like a raise or for something to be accepted. You may also have to help other people settle their arguments. So if you are a skilled debater and you can recognize the flaws or advantages in someone's argument, you may be able to become a better negotiator. And finally, you are sometimes going to have to defend yourself. You may have to, literally in a court trial, defend why you are innocent, or just in a conversation prove why something was an accident or why something shouldn't happen. But before we get started, we really have to establish what debate even is and what the difference is between debating and fighting. Under the umbrella of persuasion, let's start with argument. Arguing in general is kind of a word that gets a bad reputation. When you hear the word argument, you think of arguing like people fighting. But in truth, an argument is really just presenting a persuasive opinion. Argument doesn't have to have a bad connotation. It doesn't always mean there's conflict. This is just someone presenting their side to someone else, and there may not even be another person involved. If you're writing an argument, then your essay or your paper may not even get read, or may be read by a limited audience who may or may not even disagree with you. So an argument is just when you present your opinion, period. A debate, on the other hand, is when at least two people, maybe more, equally try to prove why their side is right. And they're typically using a formal structure of maybe taking turns or a more elaborate structure that involves times and who can speak and when. And finally, a fight is the more negatively connotated word. A fight is an actual confrontation or conflict in which people cross lines to prove to each other who or what is right. And I say right in quotation marks because we don't even know if there is a right answer to the debate, or to the fight, excuse me. Fighting can sometimes be physical, or it can just be verbally crossing a line, such as attacking the other person. And this is the one that we really don't want. We really don't want to be fighting. And the bottom line here, friends, is that fighting is, again, when you're personally attacking in order to win. Debate focuses more on logic and attempting to have an objective discussion to determine what is right. So again, what is debate? We've kind of previously established this in the previous slide, but I want to remind you that debate could be formal or informal. Debate is more than just a court trial, and it doesn't have to involve a podium or microphones or an audience listening. Okay. There may or may not be a judge. It may or may not be two people even competing. It doesn't have to be political. And there may or may not be consequences for the loser. Obviously, if we are debating in a court over whether or not someone is innocent, then the guilty person could go to jail, and there are real consequences. But debate is more than just that. Debating is, again, not fighting, and it's also more than just bickering. In a debate, elaborate types of logic can be used to make things complicated or to, again, demonstrate evidence to prove why you are right. There's also many different formal types of debate. Each one has their very own set of rules and structures for what is said and when. It's impossible to cover in just this video all the different types of debate, so we're just going to talk about one today. And we're going to be focusing on Lincoln-Douglas debates. Later in this unit, we're going to do a simplified version of LD. So what is Lincoln-Douglas debate? Well, this genre of debating was based on some historical events. There were a series of 7 famous debates in 1858 between Abraham Lincoln and Senator Stephen Douglas. Now, this was before the Civil War even started and before Lincoln was president. This is when he was just trying to get in the state Senate. This is very early in his political career. They were both really excellent speakers, and they drew large crowds, and they presented these debates in public in an open audience. They debated a lot of different things, but one of them was slavery. They were opposing candidates in the state Senate race, and their debates are, for the most part, written down. You can actually go read them, but their debates became so famous that today, modern students still use their structure and copy their style to compete using LD. If you are in a high school debate team, or if you proceed to any kind of competition for debate, then you might be using LD structure. LD structure looks a little something like this. First of all, the two debaters take turns using very specific time limits. You see that the affirmative is the positive or the pro side. The negative is the con side. We begin with an affirmative giving an opening statement. The negative immediately gets to cross-examine or interrogate the other side before they then get their own turn to give an opening speech. And then they take turns rebutting each other, asking each other questions until finally they get some final closing statements in. Notice that this is a pretty fast pace, and it's a combination of delivering prepared speeches, rebutting the other person's comments, and interrogating them to ask clarification questions. So this is pretty complicated, but don't worry, we're not going to quite go this far in this unit today. So, how exactly will you be debating? Before we get into that, we need to establish some ground rules and some vocabulary for the structure and types of things you could say in your debates that you will be performing. The first two terms that you need to know are opening and closing statement. These are a little obvious by their names, but an opening statement is a statement made by the lawyer for each side at the beginning of a trial, in which each lawyer outlines the case he or she intends to present. So this is the equivalent of an introduction paragraph. It previews everything that the person is planning to say, some of their major points, and it might even include a preview of their attack of the other side. They may mention a counterargument and their initial statements for their refutation of that other side. Then in the middle of a trial, they'd go back and forth examining each other, and at the end, each one will give a closing statement. A closing statement in a trial is when each attorney gives their summary of the case, which attempts to persuade the judge and maybe the jury to favor his or her side. This is your last chance to really make a memorable impact on your audience. Some other terms to know include counterargument and rebuttal. A counterargument is the opposite argument or viewpoint from what the speaker is saying. So if I believe that Burger King is the superior fast food restaurant and you believe that McDonald's is better, then your belief about McDonald's is the counterargument to mine. A rebuttal is the response that refutes an argument. It's your comeback to that counterargument. Okay? So, again, if we're fighting over Burger King versus McDonald's, then if I give you all my reasons for why Burger King is better, you could refute that by giving me a rebuttal or your comeback to my statement. Here are a few more terms that we need to know. All of these verbs are actions that you might take during a debate. If you justify something, then you're defending, explaining, or making excuses for it through reasoning. So if the student tries to justify why his homework was late, but there were no good excuses, then he tried to provide reasons why his homework was late, but he maybe failed. To acknowledge means to recognize or admit. For example, I can acknowledge that you have a point, but that solution's still impossible. When you acknowledge, then that you give some credit to them, but acknowledging is not the same thing as surrendering or giving in completely. So usually it's a good idea to acknowledge the other side, acknowledge counterarguments or opposing viewpoints, as long as you still refute them later. If you delineate, that means you're marking the outline of, sketching, or describing in detail. we often will delineate the argument of the other side to look for their weak points. So, for example, the students tried to delineate the speaker's argument by making an outline of all the main ideas. Next is evaluating. If you evaluate, you're not just reading or listening. You're going to examine, assess, and judge carefully. For example, the judge evaluated all of the evidence and decided who was guilty. So remember that when you're judging or evaluating, you're making an actual decision. You're not just thinking about it, but you're coming to a conclusion. Here are a few more claims we need to know. A claim is a statement or assertion that is open to challenge and that requires support. So a claim is very similar to an opinion. It's something that is not automatically a given and you have to then go about proving it. For example, in my essay, I claimed that pizza was better than burgers, and my assumption here is that in the essay, the person would have to spend the rest of the time proving why pizza was better. Evidence is relevant pieces of information that support a claim. Facts, quotations, examples, statistics, and stories can all count as evidence, although obviously the situation will depend as to which evidence is most appropriate. Logic is a method of reasoning or thinking. Now, this term can get very complicated very quickly. Entire lessons could be devoted, entire semesters could be devoted to logic. So today we're just going to remember that this is a way of coming to conclusions. For example, I use logic to realize that if Disney is magic, and magic makes wishes come true, then going to Disneyland would make my wishes come true. And finally, reasoning is a mental activity that consists of organizing information or beliefs into a series of steps to reach conclusions. Now, friends, logic is a type of reasoning, okay? Reasoning is any sequential set of steps you take or thinking that you take, again, to reach a conclusion or to make a decision. A few more words we need to know include relevant and irrelevant, which are opposites. If you say something that is relevant, that means that what you have said is connected with or related to the subject. So you're staying on topic. If something is irrelevant, it has nothing to do with the subject. If you have stated an irrelevant claim, for example, then you're being off topic, and this is not a good idea. In a debate, it's a really good idea, and it's a great strategy to listen to the other person and try to notice when they have said something irrelevant, because then you can call them out on it, and your argument will look way better. Now finally, we need to talk about causation versus correlation. Causation is a cause and effect relationship in which one variable controls the changes in the other. So this is, again, simple cause and effect. Don't let the longer term causation confuse you. It just means cause and effect. A related term is correlation, which means there's just a relationship between two variables. Now friends, here's the trick. If you can learn this now, this is something you can use against other people for the rest of your life. Just because two things are related doesn't mean that one causes the other. We don't want to confuse causation and correlation. Okay? For example, does smoking always cause cancer, or are the two things just related? Well, although there's a very, very strong correlation here, we don't want to go around saying that smoking causes cancer if in fact that's only partially or sometimes true. If a person were to pick up a cigarette just once and then never touch them again, that doesn't mean they're automatically going to get cancer. So, although we can agree that smoking is terrible for your health and it's not a good idea at all ever, technically from a logical perspective, it's not a good idea to say that smoking causes cancer. You could also use the same kind of logic to decide, well, French fries won't automatically make you fat. There are other factors too. Thank you for watching this video. If you need some help on learning all of these words, a great way to study is to go to Quizlet.com, search for the set St. Bridget 7-8 Debate Unit Vocabulary, and you will find flashcards for all of the terms we've introduced today. Thank you.